Okay, this video will be about drawing hairstyles for our front view self-portraits. I've made a photocopy of my original drawings so that I can do several different types of hairstyles on this. So I have a reference page for you guys that has lots and lots of hairstyle references, these and many more. But the biggest question I get is, how do I draw my hair? So I'm going to use some examples from class, some reference photos from class to try to help with that. All right, so I usually do at least a couple of short hairstyles and a couple of long hairstyles. So we'll start with a couple of short hairstyles. The steps for doing hair are the same, no matter the hairstyle. We want to start with the shape. So chances are you're going to have to do some close observation here, some real observation, and be somewhat independent. So you're going to start by observing the shape of the hairline. So we're going to look at this area, and this is a trick that you can use, by the way. So if you're having a hard time just observing it, try kind of outlining what you see. So the better the outline, the better it will be. And you can include the shape of your face too, if that helps. Oops. I don't know what function I just woke up there. I haven't had that happen before. I wanted to try to make a straight line for me. All right, so there would be the inside of the hairstyle. So as you can see, I've lightly sketched in my own hairline. So for this hairstyle, this person, this side part is pretty much the same, this side portion of the hairline. We might have the hairline a little bit lower and some of the hair is kind of falling across the forehead. So notice we don't have to just do one heavy line. We can start to think about the texture of the hair already. So putting that in, and I'm going to go a little bit heavier. I was using my HB, I'm going to use my 2B so that you can see that a little bit better. And we may make this hairline even more textured as we continue. And I'm going to zoom in on this just a little bit. Okay, so next thing we need to do is put in the top part of the hair. So again, if you're having a hard time seeing this, you can help yourself by kind of outlining this. I will say having a good photo for this is really helpful. So what makes a good photo is one with plenty of light, especially if you have dark hair. It can be harder to see what's going on, so that's even more important that you take a photograph in good light. And that includes not having yourself backlit. So that's been one problem sometimes as people are taking quick reference photos of themselves in class. They may be facing at an angle where they're not getting good light. So if you take the photo where you're facing the window, that's going to be better. Okay, so that kind of gives us the overall shape of the hair. And I'm going to quickly, I won't show you this because as you can see, I have the faces blocked out for privacy. But to see that even better, you can kind of grab onto your photo in OneNote with your cursor, click on it, and drag the photo away, and you can see even more clearly what you've outlined. You could continue to do the shape of the ears and the face there to help you. All right, so if you're having trouble kind of seeing the shape, doing that can help. So if I leave that on there, it may be a little bit difficult, so I'll probably erase that in a minute. So as I'm putting this on here, it's hard to see because I made a photocopy and the photocopy doesn't always pick up pencil super well. So I'm just going to draw in where the skull would be. So as we're doing the hair, we actually want to make sure that we put this a good bit above the skull, and how much depends on the hair. This student's hair is kind of full and springy with the curls, so I'm going to start that fairly far up. And I'm doing kind of this kind of dome across the top and then down the sides. It gets short and narrows in. And you can see, so again, I'm picking up the wrong pencil. I'll do that again. So again, I'm trying to pay attention to what's happening with the texture already. So if it's curls instead of a flat line, using kind of a somewhat bumpy line. Here where it gets short, the curl is not going to be able to come out as much, so it might just be kind of short little texture. And I am going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of this line because I can actually see better if I do that. I can see the details better. Once you've got the basic shape, I can see some of that texture better. This is another reason why it's great to have a digital photo. You can like really zoom in on some of these details. Okay, so continuing with that. And this doesn't have to be perfect right now. This person's head is a little bit tilted, so I'm going to make it a little bit more symmetrical than I see. And then make sure when you're bringing this, if you've got a short hairstyle like this, notice where it comes behind the ears. And when you were doing the ear, hopefully you noticed this little bit of hair coming in front of the ear, a sideburn, if you will. So if you didn't draw that in, you may need to go back and make room for it. I would say the biggest mistake that people make with that is that they try to put it inside the face. That actually does come outside the cheekbone here in front of the ear. All right, so I've got a little bit of a sideburn in there, so we're just gonna keep rolling with that. All right, so I've got the basic shape. Now, the shape is going to be the first step of getting in the form. So yes, hair is made up of lots of little strands, but those little strands make larger forms, and that's what you've got to draw. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to erase the dome of the head. And I'm going to start to think about the forms. All right, so we've got a lot of these kind of smallish forms like so, but we also have kind of a larger form or two here. So right here, this top part of the head is kind of one separate form, separate from these side areas. So this is going to be a large form, if you will. And then within that, you may think about sort of this front area as one form, so it doesn't stand out as distinctly as it might in another hairstyle, but it's still helpful to kind of think about this front or bang area as a form. So you can start by, before we do the smaller forms, you might kind of start by sort of indicating these large areas. So probably this largest one first that we delineated. So something like that. And then maybe delineating this, or just keeping it in mind. So maybe I'll just put it in very lightly here to kind of remind myself. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this outlining now. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start shading some of this before I add more detail. So we have a particular light situation going on here. I'm going to focus more on kind of an idea of where I want the space to go in and come out. Okay, so I have a few different tools. I'm going to put this in front of my face so it doesn't smear. I might use my pencil, but I might also use my graphite stick. So the sides of the head and the back of the head are a little farther back in space. So I'm going to start by shading these in, and I'm going to also shade along the edges. And notice as I'm doing that, if we zoom in a little bit, you can see that as I'm shading, I can be sort of following where the texture of the hair is going to be. So something like that. So same thing here on the other side. And I'm just kind of going in this direction toward the other side. So along the inside edge, underneath this form at the top, and along this edge. And we can shade these areas, blend these areas in a little bit. So we've got kind of a rounded form, and we're shading it at the edges like we've done before with rounded forms. All right, now with this top part of the hair, I'm also going to treat these as rounded forms. So we're going to have back here a little bit darker and also darker as it curves around. So it's curving back at the top of the head. And I might go in and try using this a little bit. I'm not going to worry too much about this edge. I actually do not want a hard edge probably on the hair for this hairstyle. If the hair were straight or longer, we might want kind of a flatter edge, but we're going to want to actually show more texture up there. So hopefully you've drawn that line pretty light. So if I need to, I can kind of come in here. So I'm going to kind of start to follow sort of these curls that I'm seeing up here a little bit as I'm shading, if I need to shade with my pencil. So see how I'm kind of making these rounded marks as I'm shading. So the hair is just falling over in kind of these rounded forms. All right, and I'm going to do the same thing sort of behind this area. So we're going to have some of this front area pop forward a little bit more. So we got that part shaded in a little bit. And we're not going to have really hard edges yet. All right, and then we're going to also shade in this area here. So this, the way the hair is kind of sticking out here sort of forms a little bit of a ledge that's going to make it darker underneath. And you're really seeing that underneath here too. You see it in here a little bit as some of these curls fall over on themselves. So I'm shading in kind of these bigger areas first. I'm going to switch to a 4B to go a little bit darker. All right, so the shape of these curls is they're kind of waves like so. that's kind of what we're seeing. So the shape might be, you might be seeing this happen, you might be seeing this happen in some places. So you see this front part is kind of falling over and curling over this underneath part. So the hair might be coming up underneath here and then falling over itself like a wave in the ocean. So that's the kind of thing we're going to see in the hair. All right, so, and I'm kind of delineating where some of these curls are. Notice how they overlap one another. So that's the kind of thing that we want to see with this. So I am going to pull out in my drawing some of these shapes a little bit, and I'm going to shade around them. And then in front of that, I've got maybe another curl like this. So I'll just kind of delineate sort of where some of these are going to be first. So it doesn't matter if we're getting these perfect, but see how these are kind of corresponding to these shapes that we've got over here. And they're all kind of coming on top of each other. So you want to see where one falls on top of another. So something like this. And I really do like to do this with a reference. I think the biggest thing that can go wrong here pretty easily is that you try to make all of these exactly the same size and make them all really perfect. And that's not how they look in real life, so we don't want that to happen. All right, so now I'm going to sort of start shading these. So this is in back of this, so I can shade in back of this. So see how all of these shading marks, they're going with the form. And then I can also shade behind this to make that feel like it's popping out. And all these little lines that I'm making, we're going to keep those. So I'm also wanting to make sure some of these harder edges kind of disappear a little bit because we don't see really, really precise forms in here. We're seeing these a little bit chaotic. So I'm sort of shading around each of these, and I am paying attention to where I see lighter areas and darker areas. So see how I'm seeing some darker areas there? So I'm adding darker areas between the curls. I can reinforce this idea that underneath this edge, I've got some dark, and I can start to notice some of these details. So as I get to the edge, I can make this more realistic by having some of these pop forward a little bit more than we had before. And maybe I'll add, we got this side of the hair pretty well, but maybe we can give it a little bit more detail, a little bit more length as well, a little bit more texture along here. So with these short hairs, you may not see them curl quite as much. Notice in here too, I'm also going to create these texture marks right along the edge so you don't have a line here. We're making these texture marks where the hair is growing out of the scalp there, out of the forehead. So let's see, so continuing, so again, we want to make sure that these ones kind of, the area behind some of these curls gets shaded. So that's how we have this front area looks like it pops out. And then we're going to keep going, so noticing some of these light and dark areas. Again, all of these lines that I'm doing are following the bigger forms. And again, I'm noticing what comes in front of what. So an area like this pops forward, so I'm shading around it. I can also, if it's gotten a little bit dark, I can pull out some of those lines with my eraser. So in here, in the front, again, I can pull out some of this texture along the hairline here. So again, that's going to make it look more natural. And it's just popping out of these larger forms. So I'm continuing to follow some of these larger forms. So here is one of the big curls I noticed, and that's right here. So I'm shading underneath this wave. And notice how this hair in front of it pops out and is lighter. So I'm sort of shading up to that area. So this is definitely a more complicated style. Curly hair is a little bit more detailed, takes a little bit more time. And I can blend areas if they're a little too chaotic. I can blend some areas and then go back in and just add a little texture on top of that. All right, I'm going to speed up a little bit now as I keep going. But I am continuing to observe. Again, if you try to do this kind of coming up with a pattern and repeating it, it won't look as realistic. So again, finding these dark areas here, finding along the edge, what do the details, what do those curls popping out there look like? And again, finding the lighter areas, shading behind there. Shading into the form a little bit, but it can be darker around the form that pops out. And the part around those forms that pop out is also made of forms and hair. So we're just, again, wanting to have all of those different areas wherever you're shading is going to have that wave to the line. So, but this is more controlled and has more order to it than if you just started kind of randomly putting in lines everywhere. So again, the edges are very important areas to add the texture. I'm going to zoom out a little bit now. So these edges are very important areas to add texture. And then again, underneath this part, it's going to get a little darker. And I want to try to follow the direction that I see the hair growing. So I've pretty much covered all of this with lines. All right, so looking at the big picture, I might see, you know what, some of these are a little too bright, so I could shade those in a little more with the side of my pencil. And again, I'm following the forms as I do that. Another thing I could do is use a dirty blending tool and follow those forms. If I end up blending a little bit too much. So notice I'm following the forms even while I blend. So I don't want to get rid of all this detail. And I can go back in and add a little more detail here and there. I can add some darker areas here and there. Again, and I'm concentrating on where I either see darker areas or I want to create kind of the overall look of the form. So that's looking pretty good now. I might go back in and see, maybe I see a little bit too much detail or contrast. So I could erase out some. So you don't want the hair to have more detail or pop out more than the features. So I'm just lessening the contrast a little bit. Other things, again, I often see are sort of hard edges around areas, so check for that. And if it's too much of a hard edge, you could add little bits of hair texture, so just little tiny lines at the edge as needed. All right, but we basically have that hair. That looks kind of funny. It's kind of my face and this student's hair. All right, so there you go. We've got some short curly hair there.